Thomas woke up at 5:30 every morning. His small flat was cold and quiet. He lived alone in a tiny room above the bakery on Elm Street in London. The walls were thin, and he could hear the baker starting work downstairs. He made himself a cup of tea and ate a piece of toast. Thomas always saved the butter for special days. Today was not special. It was just another Tuesday morning in November. Thomas put on his white shirt and black trousers. He looked at himself in the cracked mirror on his wardrobe door. His mother used to say he had kind eyes. She had been gone for 5 years now. But Thomas still heard her voice sometimes. He walked 15 minutes to Miller's Cafe on the busy high street. The morning air was cold and made his cheeks red. Other people hurried past him wearing expensive coats and carrying leather bags. They all looked important and busy. Thomas unlocked the cafe door at exactly 6 o'clock. Mr. Miller, the owner, trusted him with the keys. Thomas had never been late in 3 years of working there. He turned on the lights and started the coffee machine. The first customers arrived at 6:30. They were office workers who wanted quick coffee before catching their trains. Thomas smiled at each person and said good morning. Most of them did not look at his face. They stared at their phones or watched the clock on the wall. "Large coffee. No sugar," said a man in a grey suit. He did not say please or thank you. Thomas had served him every weekday for 2 years, but the man never remembered his name. Coming right up. "Sir," Thomas said with a smile. By 8 o'clock, the morning rush was over. Thomas cleaned the tables and swept the floor. His feet already hurt from standing. But he had 8 more hours to work. Mrs. Patterson arrived at 9 o'clock. Just like every Tuesday, she was 75 years old and walked slowly with a wooden stick. Her grey hair was always neat and she wore a blue coat that had seen many winters. "Good morning, dear Thomas," she said, sitting at her usual table by the window. "Good morning, Mrs. Patterson. The usual?" Thomas asked. "Yes, please. Earl Grey tea and a scone with jam." Thomas brought her order and sat down for a moment. Mr. Miller allowed him to talk with Mrs. Patterson because she had been coming to the cafe for 20 years. "How is your sister Emma doing at university?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "She is doing very well. She's in her final year studying to become a teacher," Thomas said proudly. "You must be so proud of her, and so proud of yourself for helping her." Thomas felt his cheeks get warm. He was not used to compliments. "I just do what any brother would do." "No, dear," Mrs. Patterson said softly. "Not every brother would work so hard for his sister. You have such a good heart." Thomas, after Mrs. Patterson left, Thomas went back to work. The lunch crowd was always busy and sometimes rude. People complained when their food took too long or when their coffee was too hot. A woman in a red dress shouted at Thomas because her sandwich had mustard on it. "I said no mustard. Are you deaf or just stupid?" Thomas apologized and made her a new sandwich. His hands shook a little, but he kept smiling. His mother had always said that angry people were usually just sad or scared inside. During his break, Thomas counted the money in his tip jar. £3.40. It was not much, but every penny mattered. He had been saving for 3 years to pay for Emma's university fees. At home that night, Thomas sat on his bed and counted all his savings. He kept the money in a large glass jar that used to hold his mother's homemade jam. The jar was almost full of coins and crumpled notes. £1,235. He said to himself, "Only 300 more pounds and Emma can finish her final year." Thomas called his sister on his old mobile phone. Emma's voice always made him feel better after a long day. "Hello, Thomas. I was just thinking about you," Emma said. Her voice sounded happy and excited. "How were your classes today?" Thomas asked. "Really good. My professor said my essay about children's education was excellent. I think I might get the highest grade in my class." Thomas smiled. "That is wonderful. Emma, I am so proud of you. I could not do any of this without you. Thomas, I know you work so hard for me." Thomas never told Emma about the rude customers or how tired he felt every day. He never told her that sometimes he ate only bread and tea so he could save more money for her fees. "Do not worry about me," Thomas said. "Just focus on your studies. You are going to be an amazing teacher. I am going to make you proud." "Thomas," Emma said, "you already do." Thomas replied, just like he always did, after the phone call. Thomas made himself another cup of tea and looked out his small window at the London street below. Tomorrow would be another long day at the cafe, but it would bring him one day closer to seeing Emma graduate. Thomas believed that hard work and kindness would eventually bring good things. His mother had taught him to never give up on his dreams, even when life was difficult. The rain was hitting the windows of Miller's Cafe when Thomas noticed the clock showing 7:30. It was Thursday evening and the cafe was nearly empty. Only 2 customers sat at separate tables, both reading newspapers and drinking coffee. Thomas had been working since 6 in the morning. His feet hurt and his back was sore from carrying heavy trays all day. But he still had 2 hours left before closing time. He needed every hour of work to save money for Emma's university fees. He was wiping down the tables with a damp cloth when he heard the doorbell ring. Thomas looked up and saw a little girl walk in alone. She looked very young, maybe 8 years old. Her blonde hair was messy and her blue dress was wrinkled like she had been sitting in a car for a long time. The little girl stood by the door for a moment, looking round the cafe with wide, frightened eyes. She seemed lost and confused. Thomas had never seen a child come into the cafe alone, especially not in the evening. Thomas finished cleaning the table he was working on and walked slowly toward the little girl. He did not want to scare her. He knelt down so he was at her eye level and spoke in his gentlest voice. "Hello there, love. Are you all right?" Thomas asked. The little girl looked at him with tears in her blue eyes. She was shaking and seemed very scared. "I want my mummy," she whispered so quietly that Thomas could barely hear her. "Where is your mummy?" Thomas asked. "Is she coming to get you?" The little girl shook her head. "I don't know. Some men took me from the car park near the shopping center. They said they were taking me to see my daddy. But I don't believe them." Thomas felt his stomach drop. Something was very wrong. He looked round the cafe to make sure they were safe. The 2 customers were still reading their newspapers and had not noticed anything. "Come and sit down," Thomas said softly. "Would you like some hot chocolate?" The little girl nodded and followed Thomas to a table in the corner. Thomas brought her a cup of warm hot chocolate with marshmallows floating on top. She wrapped her small hands round the cup and took tiny sips. "What is your name?" Thomas asked. "Sophie." She said quietly, "That is a beautiful name. I am Thomas. I work here at the cafe." Sophie looked at Thomas with trusting eyes. "Are you going to help me find my mummy?" "Yes, I am going to help you," Thomas promised. Just then, the doorbell rang again. 2 men in dark coats walked into the cafe. They were both tall and wore black baseball caps pulled down over their faces. They looked round the cafe quickly, like they were searching for something. When they saw Sophie, one of the men pointed at her. "There she is," he said to his friend. Thomas felt his heart start beating very fast. The men walked toward their table with quick steps. Sophie grabbed Thomas's hand and squeezed it tight. "Come on, Sophie," the first man said. Your uncle sent us to pick you up. We need to go now." Sophie shook her head quickly and moved closer to Thomas. "I don't know them," she whispered in his ear. Thomas looked at the two men carefully. They kept looking at their phones and checking the time. Their hands were shaking and they seemed very nervous. Something about them felt dangerous. Thomas had to make a difficult choice. He could pretend he had not heard Sophie say she did not know these men. He could let them take her and continue with his work. That would be the safe thing to do for himself. But Thomas could not do that. Sophie was just a little girl and she was scared. His mother had always taught him to help people who needed help, even if it was difficult or dangerous. Thomas stood up and put his hand gently on Sophie's shoulder. He spoke in a loud, clear voice so everyone in the cafe could hear him. "Sophie, your mum just called me," Thomas said, even though this was not true. "She said she is running a bit late, but she is coming here to get you. She will be here in 10 minutes. The two men looked confused and angry. "No, that is not right," the second man said. "We are her uncles. Her family sent us to pick her up. We need to take her now." "Oh, that is strange," Thomas said, still speaking loudly. "Her mum did not mention anything about uncles coming to get her. Let me just call her too." "Confirm." Thomas pulled out his old mobile phone and pretended to look for a phone number. "What is her mum's phone number? I seem to have lost it." The two men looked at each other. They could not answer Thomas's question because they did not know Sophie's mother's phone number. They started backing toward the door. "We do not have time for this," the first man said. "We need to leave now." Thomas knew he had to act quickly. While still smiling at the men, he pressed the emergency number on his phone. Within seconds, someone answered. "Hello, police. I need help at Miller's Cafe on High Street," Thomas said clearly. "There are two men here trying to take a little girl who says she does not know them." The two men heard Thomas talking to the police and ran out of the cafe as fast as they could. Sophie was still holding Thomas's hand tightly. Thomas sat with Sophie at the corner table, still holding her small hand. She had stopped crying but was still shaking a little. The hot chocolate had grown cold. But she kept holding the cup because it made her feel safe. "The police will be here soon," Thomas said softly. "You are safe now, Sophie. Those bad men cannot hurt you." Sophie looked up at Thomas with her big blue eyes. "Are you sure they will not come back?" "I am sure," Thomas said. "The police are very good at catching bad people, and I will stay with you until your mummy comes through the window." Thomas could see blue lights flashing in the distance. The police cars were getting closer. He felt relieved but also worried. He had never called the police before and did not know what would happen next. The other customers in the cafe had noticed something was wrong. An elderly man at the front table came over to ask if everything was all right. Thomas told him that help was coming and asked him to unlock the door for the police. Within 5 minutes, 2 police officers walked into the cafe. One was a woman with short brown hair, and the other was a tall man with a kind face. They both wore dark blue uniforms and looked very serious. "I am Officer Johnson," the woman said to Thomas. "You called about a little girl." "Yes," Thomas said. "This is Sophie." 2 men tried to take her, but she said she did not know them. "They ran away when I called you." Officer Johnson knelt down next to Sophie and spoke in a gentle voice. "Hello, Sophie. Can you tell me what happened?" Sophie was shy at first, but Thomas encouraged her to speak. She told the police officers about being taken from a car park near the shopping center. She described the 2 men and their dark coats. "We have already caught them," the tall police officer said. "They were running down Baker Street. They're in police custody now." Thomas felt a wave of relief wash over him. Sophie squeezed his hand and smiled for the first time since she had arrived at the cafe. "You did the right thing calling us," Officer Johnson told Thomas. "Your quick thinking probably saved this little girl from something very dangerous." The police officers asked Sophie more questions about where she lived and what her parents looked like. Sophie said her mummy had blonde hair like her and drove a big black car. She said her daddy was away on a business trip. "My mummy will be very worried," Sophie said. "She was only going to the shop to buy milk. She told me to wait in the car. But then those men opened the door and made me come with them." Officer Johnson called the police station on her radio. She gave them Sophie's description and asked them to contact any parents who had reported her missing child. While they waited, Thomas brought Sophie a glass of warm milk and a chocolate biscuit. He sat with her and asked about her favorite toys and books. Sophie told him about her pet rabbit named Fluffy and her best friend at school named Lucy. "You are very kind," Sophie said to Thomas. "You make me feel better." Thomas smiled. "My mummy always told me to help people who need help. You needed help, so I helped you." 20 minutes later, they heard a car stop outside the cafe very quickly. Through the window, Thomas could see a woman jumping out of a big black car before it had even stopped properly. The woman ran into the cafe with tears streaming down her face. She was wearing an expensive-looking coat, and her blonde hair was messy like she had been running. "Hands through it, Sophie." "Oh, my darling Sophie," the woman cried. Sophie jumped up from her chair and ran to her mother. "Mummy, Mummy." "I was so scared." The woman picked up Sophie and held her tight, crying and kissing her head. "I thought I had lost you forever. I was so frightened." Officer Johnson spoke to the woman, who said her name was Margaret Whitmore. She explained that she had stopped at a petrol station to buy milk and had left Sophie in the car for Jay. Used to minutes, when she came back, Sophie was gone. "I called the police immediately," Margaret said. "They have been looking for her everywhere." Margaret turned to Thomas with tears still in her eyes. "Are you the person who saved my daughter?" Thomas felt embarrassed by all the attention. "I just called the police. Anyone would have done the same thing." But Margaret shook her head firmly. "No, that is not true. Most people would have been too scared to get involved. You risked your own safety to protect my child." Margaret sat down at the table and asked Thomas to tell her exactly what had happened. Thomas explained everything, from when Sophie first walked into the cafe to when the police arrived. "You were so brave," Margaret said to Thomas, "and so kind to Sophie. Look how comfortable she is with you." Sophie was sitting on Thomas's knee now, eating her chocolate biscuit and telling her mother about the hot chocolate with marshmallows. "Thomas stayed with me the whole time," Sophie told her mother. "He made me feel safe." Margaret wiped her eyes and looked at Thomas carefully. "What is your name?" "I want to know everything about the person who saved my daughter." Thomas went back to work the next day as if nothing had happened. He did not tell his co-workers about saving Sophie or meeting her rich mother. He just tied his apron and started serving customers like he always did. But word had spread round the neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson had heard about what happened from her friend who lived near the cafe. When she came in on Tuesday, she hugged Thomas tightly. "I always knew you were special." "Dear Thomas," she said with tears in her eyes, "you are a hero." Thomas felt embarrassed. "I am not a hero, Mrs. Patterson. I just helped a little girl who was scared." "That is exactly what makes you a hero," she replied. For the rest of the week, Thomas worked his normal shifts. He served coffee and sandwiches, cleaned tables, and counted his tips. He tried not to think about Margaret Whitmore or her expensive clothes and big black car. People like her lived in a different world from people like him on Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after he had saved Sophie. Thomas was surprised to see the big black car pull up outside the cafe again. Margaret Whitmore stepped out, wearing a simple blue dress and carrying a small handbag. She walked into the cafe and looked round until she saw Thomas. She smiled and waved at him, then sat down at one of the tables in his section. Thomas felt nervous as he walked over to her table. He wondered why she had come back. Maybe she wanted to thank him again. Or maybe there was some problem with the police case. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore," Thomas said politely. "What can I get for you today?" "Please, call me Margaret," she said, with a warm smile. "And I would like a cup of tea, please. Earl Grey, if you have it." Thomas brought her the tea and was about to walk away when Margaret asked him to sit down. "I have been thinking about you all week, Thomas," she said. "I have a proposition for you." Thomas sat down carefully on the edge of the chair. He was not sure what a proposition meant, but it sounded important. "I do not want to just give you money as a reward for saving Sophie." Margaret continued, "That would not feel right to me. Instead, I want to invest in your dream." Thomas looked confused. "I do not understand." "Ma'am, I mean, Margaret." Margaret leaned forward and spoke quietly so the other customers could not hear. "You told the police officer that you dream of opening your own restaurant someday. I want to help you do that. But more than that, I want us to work together on something even bigger." Thomas shook his head. "I cannot take money from you. That would not be right. Listen to me first." Margaret said gently, "I have been very successful in business. But I have learned that money alone cannot solve problems. You have something that money cannot. You understand what real people need and you care about helping them." Margaret explained her idea. She would provide the money for Thomas to open his restaurant. But they would also start a foundation together. The foundation would help working families pay for their children's education. It would also create safe places in neighborhoods where children could go if they needed help. "You would be my partner in this," Margaret said. "Not my employee. We would make decisions together about how to help people." Thomas felt overwhelmed. "I do not need charity, Margaret. I want to earn my success through hard work." Margaret smiled. "This is not charity, Thomas. This is a partnership. I have money and business experience, but I need someone who understands what it is like to struggle. Someone who knows what families like yours really need." Thomas asked for time to think about it. Margaret gave him her phone number and told him to call her when he was ready to talk more. That evening, Thomas could not concentrate on his work. His mind kept thinking about Margaret's offer. It seemed too good to be true. Why would such a rich and important woman want to work with someone like him? After work, Thomas went to see Mr. Miller, who was counting the day's money in his small office behind the kitchen. "Mr. Miller, can I talk to you about something important?" Thomas told his boss about Margaret's offer. Mr. Miller listened carefully, nodding his head as Thomas spoke. "Thomas, lad, you have worked harder than anyone I have ever known." Mr. Miller said when Thomas finished, "You deserve this chance. You have been loyal to me and to this cafe, but you cannot work here forever." "But what if I fail?" Thomas asked. "What if I'm not good enough to run my own restaurant?" Mr. Miller laughed. "Are you joking? You know this business better than people who have been doing it for 20 years. You treat every customer with respect, even the rude ones. You never miss a day of work, and you always try to make people feel welcome." That night, Thomas called his sister Emma at university. He told her about Margaret's offer and about the foundation they would start together. Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then she started crying. "Thomas, this is amazing," she said through her tears. "You could help so many families like ours. You could make sure other brothers and sisters do not have to struggle like we did." "But what if I make mistakes?" Thomas asked. "You will make mistakes," Emma said. "Everyone does. But you will learn from them and think about all the good you could do. Mum would be so proud of you." Thomas woke up early on a bright Saturday morning in October. But this time, he was not getting ready to work at Miller's Cafe. He was getting ready to open his own restaurant for the day. It had been exactly 1 year since he had made the phone call that changed his life forever. He walked downstairs from his new flat above the restaurant. The flat was small but comfortable, with 2 bedrooms and a proper kitchen. Emma had her own room for when she visited on weekends. Thomas unlocked the front door of the restaurant and turned on all the lights. The sign outside read Emma's Kitchen in bright blue letters. Every time he saw the name, Thomas felt proud and happy. He had wanted to honor his sister, who had worked so hard at university while he supported her. The restaurant was not fancy, but it was warm and welcoming. There were 12 tables with red checkered tablecloths and fresh flowers in small vases. The walls were painted yellow, which made the whole place feel sunny even on cloudy days. Thomas had hired 3 other people to help him. There was Mary, a kind woman in her 50s who served customers and made them feel at home. There was James, a young man who helped in the kitchen and was learning to cook. And there was old Mr. Bennet, who washed dishes and told funny stories that made everyone laugh. At 9 o'clock, Thomas unlocked the front door and put up the open sign. Within minutes, his first customers arrived. They were the Johnson family. From down the street, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson came in with their 3 young children. "Good morning, Thomas," Mrs. Johnson said cheerfully. "The children have been asking all week when we could come back for your famous pancakes," Thomas smiled as he led them to their favorite table by the window. The children always ordered the same thing: pancakes with strawberries and cream. Mr. Johnson liked the full English breakfast, and Mrs. Johnson always had toast with homemade jam, coming right up. Thomas said, writing down their order. As Thomas worked in the kitchen, he could hear the restaurant filling up with more customers. On weekend mornings, families from all over the neighborhood came to Emma's Kitchen. The food was good and the prices were fair. Thomas made sure that working families could afford to eat there. At 11 o'clock, Emma arrived from the train station. She had finished university 6 months ago and was now working as a primary school teacher in a school across London. Every weekend, she came to help Thomas at the restaurant. "Morning, big brother," Emma said, giving Thomas a hug. She put on her apron and started helping Mary serve the customers. Thomas watched his sister as she talked and laughed with the families. She was naturally good with children and always remembered what they liked to eat. Emma had grown into a confident young woman, and Thomas was proud of everything she had achieved. "I still cannot believe this is all real," Emma said to Thomas during a quiet moment. "Sometimes I think I am going to wake up and find out it was all a dream." Thomas smiled. "It is real. And you helped make it happen by studying so hard and never giving up." At 12:30, Margaret and Sophie arrived for their monthly visit. Sophie was now 9 years old and had grown taller, but she still had the same blonde hair and bright blue eyes. She ran to Thomas as soon as she saw him. "Uncle Thomas," Sophie said, hugging him tightly. "I missed you." "I missed you too, Sophie," Thomas said. "How was school this week?" Sophie told Thomas all about her classes and her friends, while Margaret watched with a smile. Margaret had become like family to Thomas and Emma. She was not just their business partner, but a true friend. The foundation helped another 10 families this month. Margaret told Thomas quietly, "That makes 60 families total who can now afford to send their children to university." Thomas felt a warm feeling in his chest. The foundation that he and Margaret had started was called Helping Hands. It gave money to working families so their children could get a good education. They also had safe centers in 5 different neighborhoods where children could go if they needed help. Mrs. Patterson arrived at 1 o'clock, just like she used to do at Miller's Cafe every Tuesday. She was now 86 years old and moved, more slowly, but she still came to see Thomas every week. "I always told everyone that you had a special heart, dear Thomas," Mrs. Patterson said as he brought her usual Earl Grey tea and scone. "Look at all the good you have done." That evening, after all the customers had gone home and the restaurant was clean and tidy, Thomas sat alone at one of the tables. He looked round at everything he had built. The restaurant was more than just a business. It was a place where families came together, where neighbors became friends, and where everyone felt welcome. On the wall behind the counter, there was a photograph of his mother in a simple wooden frame. She was standing in their old kitchen, smiling at the camera. Thomas had been 10 years old when the picture was taken. Thomas walked over to the photograph and touched the glass gently. "I hope I made you proud, Mom," he whispered. "I tried to remember everything you taught me about being kind to people." He turned off the lights and locked the door. Tomorrow he would open again, ready to serve good food and continue helping his community grow stronger and happier. The end.